Yeah, so welcome to the Psychedelic Society. So today we're going to have Blake Rupert, who's going to be giving a talk on psychedelic Buddhism. And before we do that, though, I wanted to just spend a second just kind of, especially looking around here in the beautiful land that we live in, and just the beautiful mountains in the background, and wanted to take just a moment just to acknowledge the unceded territory of the indigenous peoples, and just honor and commemorate their kinship to the land. And certainly, like anything that we can do moving forward with regards to psychedelics in terms of healing traumas and building bridges and raising awareness is something that I definitely want to be part of. Certainly, I've noticed a change in conversation surrounding psychedelics, especially certainly in this last year. For those of you who know, I'm a nurse. I work in the ER at St. Paul's, and I've witnessed something fairly remarkable, especially over this last year, which is the opening up of the space to talk safely about psychedelics and things relating to psychedelics. In this last couple of months, even, I've witnessed points where the medical professionals, the nurses, even the doctors and such, when we're in the break room, having conversations about psychedelics, people sharing their journeys and some of them their challenges, others asking questions, and a lot of them coming up with questions and some of them saying, hey, I've heard my cousin talking about this, or, I've read an article about this, so that's really cool. Like, this is something that's coming into the purview, and I think that's something really amazing, just to see this kind of sea change and, this cultural shift, or this acceptance of psychedelics and all the benefits that it offers. And, and that's part of what we're all here for. That's what the Psychedelic Society is about. It's about having the speakers in these conversations. It's about asking the questions, learning, sharing, connecting, and just being part of a community. So that's something I'm really happy to be part of with you guys, and I'm happy to be on this journey with you. And with that, I welcome you to our 23rd meetup for our Psychedelic Society. Before we get to our guest speaker, I just wanted to spend a moment just to mention that we do have a group chat, which is an online chat where there's over 75 members, and it's a very engaged chat where we can kind of keep this conversation going. People share their experiences, their journeys. It's a very lively and very engaging chat. It's a very beautiful place to come in, and it's a very safe space to be able to talk about these kind of things. So I welcome you guys to join that. If you are interested, please shoot me a message on the meetup.com app. So not the chat in the Zoom, but the meetup.com where you register for the event. So if you can send a message there with your number and just download the Telegram app, we can go through the steps to get you into that group chat. As well, I want to mention that we are having a questions and answers period after Blake finishes his talk. So we'll just save all the questions for the end there. We also have the code of conduct. So Ken, he's our group moderator. I'll pass it on to him in a second. He's just going to go through sort of the basic things that you can do, like raising your hand, asking questions, things like that. And finally, I just want to announce that our next meetup is also scheduled. So on the 27th of March, we're going to have Paul Kruger. He's a famous mycologist, and he's an expert in the field. He's been doing this kind of stuff for over 40 years. He's going to talk about sort of magic mushrooms and their history in like BC, and like their roots and how they were rediscovered in Mexico. And there's a bunch of really cool stuff that he's going to be going over. So we're really excited to have them over here. And it's going to be, again, on the 27th of March. So we're just going to be creating that event in the next couple of days. So just watch for that. And we're looking forward to seeing you there. With that, I'm going to pass it on to Ken, and he'll just go through our code of conduct.
All right. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon on this wonderful sunny afternoon we're competing with here. Just want to mention, as you noticed when you came on, that we are recording this meeting. And so we will do our best to maintain privacy, but it's not guaranteed. But basically, we are recording, and we do plan to share these recordings on our YouTube channel in the future. For your own privacy, you have a few different options. You can change your name in Zoom. You can hit the participants button, and you can, if you click on touch your own name, like on your phone, or click on your own name on the computer, you can change your own name. So if you wanted to just put in whatever there, so you aren't there. Obviously, if you want to disable your video, people won't see your face. And that's that. If you are really concerned about privacy and want to ask a question, you can message me your question directly, mentioning specifically that you don't want your name to be answered, of course. And again, I can't give everyone a lesson of how to work Zoom, but the zoom.com is a really good help set up if you have problems with Zoom. I'll try to help if I can here, but I can't. You can't be tech support for 50 people. Definitely please mute yourself when you're not talking. The mute button should be pretty easy to find. You are muted by default, so thank you for that, because it can be very distracting in the middle here, but please do. The way we're going to structure this is we're going to have the talk in the beginning, and then we're going to do Q&A after the talk. But you can certainly, if you plan on asking a question, you can write it down and remember whatever it is, and ask it when the QA portion comes up. If you know you're going to want to ask a question during the QA portion, you can raise your hand at any point. So that, and I'll try to keep some amount of order to it, but again, I'll kind of do my best there. If you ask a bunch of questions in chat, I will try to ask them in order or whatever, but it's really best to kind of type in your questions when the QA time happens, because your question might get answered by the end of this talk, for example. So just kind of keep that in mind and how we can handle that. If you have problems with audio, one option is, did want to mention that you can, there's a dial-in option for Zoom, which is cool. If you have bad Wi-Fi or anything, you can have the Zoom meeting call you, or you can call in and put in the code or whatever, and that'll help you if you have a flaky connection. Then just last thing is we will take a bio break for like 3 minutes, go to the bathroom, get a drink, do whatever you need, and then we'll be doing our breakout sessions, which will be like 6 to 8 people usually. And we'll let that run. In general, we like this event to be 2 hours, but if people want to keep going, you're more than welcome to keep chatting and hang out. That could be about this topic or about psychedelics in general or whatever you want. But please do, just want to ask to be respectful to each other in these breakouts. Sometimes you can be sensitive subjects. We want to just make sure that people are respectful to each other. And if you do have any problems, obviously you're free to leave at any point, but you definitely should let us know if there's anyone that's kind of being a disruptor or causing problems. But in general, we've been a pretty kind group, and I expect the best of us. So really, that's all. If you have any questions about anything here, pop me a note on the chat, which you can directly, and I'll hand it back off to Christoph.
Perfect. Thank you, Ken, for going through all that. So without further ado, then we're going to introduce Blake. So Blake is going to be sharing his insights at the intersection of psychedelics and Buddhism. He will explore how we might integrate practices, enhance our epistemic and ontological foundations, and deeply ground ourselves in the unyielding present. Blake will consider how this knowledge can allow us to alleviate suffering, discover our true freedom, and surf the ever-emergent uncertainty in our lives. Blake is an accomplished mentor who combines a Buddhist practice with psychedelic insights and nature-based wisdom. He has a BA from Dalhousie, where he double majored in psychology and philosophy, studying topics like consciousness and the feasibility of producing thinking machines. So I'm really excited to have Blake come on over here. We've had some really interesting conversations with him. He's got an amazing mind. He's got a really good ability to articulate his ideas, and he's just got some really amazing insights. So I'm very much looking forward to this. And again, I really welcome you and thank you for coming over here and joining us, Blake. Oh, I also wanted to mention, Blake also does have a podcast. It's called Rupert Radio. So you can find that on any of the major podcast stations or apps. And there's also, it's Explore of Course. That's his tag there. So you can correct me, Blake, if I butchered any of those, but I'll hand it off to you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Christoph. And yeah, thank you also, Kenny, and everyone who invited me to speak here. Thank you all to you who have tuned in also to listen. I really appreciate your time. I also just want to take a moment to give thanks to my meditation and Buddhism teacher. His name's Gil Fronsdale. He's at the Insight Meditation Studio in Redwood, California. Today, I want to give a brief introduction to why I think psychedelics and Buddhism together are an incredible tool for cultivating a sustainable and directable mode of connection with peak experiences, as well as, like Christoph said, being in the unyielding present and surfing uncertainty. Specifically, there's some key notions that I find that have been ported over or like translated to Western versions of Buddhism that maybe are missing from what we should really appreciate as we think about how to live our life in a Buddhist philosophy or methodology. And so I'll be going through some of the just basic principles of the kind of Buddhism that I subscribe to and I practice. And a note on that, I think anytime anyone makes a claim that they're going to tell you what Buddhism is, or maybe any sort of philosophy, it should come with the caveat that it is that person's version of Buddhism. I make no claims that my Buddhism is the Buddhism or it's the right Buddhism. I've heard some people say, oh, but mine's the oldest, or I've subscribed to this because it's the most true. And I have no idea about that. All I can share is what I've found to be valuable in my own life, in my own practice, and with the people I work with. And specifically, it's a lineage called Theravada Buddhism. I believe it's also called Thai Forest Buddhism. So yeah, if you want to double click on that, you can find more information under those names. Some of the main points I want to cover are around the idea of mindfulness and how mindfulness is a wonderful tool that I think Western culture has really seized upon as being useful for not only decreasing stress, but also promoting or flourishing and healthy life in everyday practice. And when I engage with psychedelics, I'm amazed by how well the practice of mindfulness translates and helps keep me or others who use it safe, as well as helping them get the most benefit out of such a transformational tool. But I think there's limits to mindfulness, or better said, it's not enough simply to be mindful. I'm not sure where this got lost in translation, but I was taught that before mindfulness, there's other steps of understanding meditation and, by association, Buddhism. So the first teaching of Buddhism, basically the only teaching of Buddhism, the only claim, the only conjecture is desire is a source of all suffering. It's a bit of a tricky one, and I think we could go on for quite a while debating manifest or access. But I would encourage this conversation to the root of all suffering. After that, the Buddha and others suggest or ask us to consider that if you want to investigate this desire and how it creates suffering, we can do two things. The second of which is mindfulness. The first, I don't hear many people speaking about, and that is bare attention. Another name for it might be simple attention. You'll notice here that bare attention actually comes before mindfulness. So there's a step relationship, a linear pathway there. And I think we hear a lot of emphasis on this mindfulness part, but bare attention needs to happen in order for us to really sit with and experience what's going on for us. So bare attention, what is it? It's basically the ability to detect the smallest protuberance or signal on your being. I once heard it described as being a pond, and bare attention being the ability to note a leaf landing on the surface of the pond and being, okay, there's a leaf over there. Or feeling that a breeze is shifting the lily pads as they move across the top of the pond. That is bare attention. Mindfulness is what happens afterwards, is the ability to sit with and investigate, to direct the spotlight of attention onto the sensation once it has been noticed and be like, what is the texture of that sensation? What is the quality? So the first is like a radar. Bare attention is noticing that something is occurring. And once it's been noticed, we can employ mindfulness and sit with and examine the sensations such as they are. What's really interesting, or what blew me away when I was first learning about it, is that everything I've said so far, that's basically it for Buddhism. That's all it is. Desire is the source of all suffering. And if you wish to investigate or understand desires, you can use meditation, which is the combination of bare attention and mindfulness. This practice, this commitment, this methodology is just transformational. I can't underscore how profound an experience it is for myself to come to this regularly and be committed to engaging with my sensations, however they are, and to try and notice, one, that they're occurring, and two, allow myself into the often overwhelming or scary notions of what I'm feeling. Just really look around and be like, what's going on here? And so that leads me to another key point, that if you are somebody who wants to increase your awareness, develop additional degrees of freedom to reduce suffering, and to hopefully have a way that you can navigate growth and development, I think once you understand meditation and the key claim of Buddhism, there's some other things, some other wisdom teachings. These are not prescriptive lessons from an authority. They're not the dictates of a God. These are just things that people have tested and shared and come up with. And I find them incredibly helpful as I engage with life, and especially with psychedelic domains. And the second one is that there are two extreme paths. This is the Buddha's teaching, that we have two extreme ends of a spectrum that we often find ourselves on when we are exposed to different stimuli. On one end, we have the fight or the flee or the hide. So if we feel angry, we might not want to feel it and be like, it's too overwhelming. I just shouldn't be angry right now. Or if we're sad, we might want to suppress it and squash it and ignore it. And that is one end of what the Buddha suggested is a common mode or pattern of behavior of reacting to different stimuli. On the other end of the spectrum, we have this complacency, this surrender, this sense that whatever stimuli or sensations that come up, earlier we talked about the leaf landing on the pond or the wind blowing the surface. If we are on the second mode of reaction, we might feel that wind blow and be like, I can't do anything to control that. And then just fully devote our attention to it such that the sensation feels like it's the only thing that exists. Perhaps an easier way of understanding this is, I'm sure we're all familiar with a craving to eat junk food or ice cream or something like that. And there can be a sense often of pleasure welling up, and it's so big that we lose ourselves in the presence of the stimuli. As a thinking or relating being, we give up our ability to relate and just let the feelings surround us. And so on one end, we're avoiding sensations, we're fighting them. On the other, we're giving ourselves up to them and wrapping them around us. There is a third path, a path of balance. And it's one that Buddhist practitioners often speak to as being a skillful path. And it's a path of simply noticing that a sensation is arising and allowing oneself to participate with it without the need to surrender to it or to fight it. Simply to observe, this is true, with curiosity, compassion, and openness. It's all the things that I think so many skillful practitioners of psychedelic experiences really try and promote. This idea of not resisting when there are difficult or challenging or intense stimuli. As a philosophy, Buddhism espouses the idea that we can do this at all times with all sensations, and that by doing so, we increasingly develop an ability to be honest about what is occurring, as well as deepening our practice or our degrees of freedom to respond in the ways that we wish or that we choose to. The last mode of, or the last teaching of Buddhism that I really want to add here that I think drives it home is a notion of sensations or stimuli, and kind of really defining or drilling down on what that means. I think so often when I talk to people, I get the impression that they think that meditation or mindfulness is simply going and sitting and being still in order to feel calm. And there's this priority placed on peace or on stillness and on feeling good and relaxed. And something that really astonished me when I first was exposed to it was the notion that for for Buddhists, there are no such thing as good or objectively bad sensations or stimuli. So I want to notice here that sensations and stimuli refer to anything that we might experience in our being, our mind, our heart, our body. And I think so often we can find different sensations come up that we have an immediate reaction to, one of fear or aversion or resistance, all these different things that fell on those two spectrums of fighting or fleeing, and or also like giving yourself up or like trying to get as much as it is possible. And what Buddhists ask us to consider and to use meditation to investigate is whether or not any of those sensations actually have meaning, or if they're just in fact neutral. And what many Buddhists over time have recorded and documented in their own process of introspection and self-discovery is the realization that these signals, these stimuli that we experience when we pay close attention, when we use bare attention and mindfulness, they're devoid of any negativity or positivity. They simply are sensations. So we might in fact have relationships with them. Say if you touch a hot stove, you may very quickly realize you don't want to be touching that hot stove. But the sensation, the pain response in itself is just a signal. The way I think about this is being in a cockpit of a ship or a like spaceship or something cool like that. And I think about in front of me a whole buttload of buttons that represent different components of the ship. And this ship, by the way, is my being, my brain, body, and heart. And as I'm in the cockpit, different signals come up throughout my day as I move through the world that signal to me different emotional cues, different stimuli about the world. And now, reflexively, I might have the inclination to see, say, a red gas can or a battery, probably is more appropriate, icon start flashing urgently, and have learned or patterned my belief of this stimuli to be like, uh-oh, my spaceship's battery is about to die. That's bad. And so often, I think, as we move through the world, we have emotional or physiological somatic experiences of different stimuli, and we're so quick to label them good or bad. And I would just invite any who have the interest to really practice this noticing when that occurs. And once you've noticed it, once that radar blip, you've tuned in on it, allow yourself to meet it without resistance or without the need to change it or fix it or swerve off of it quickly. And see, is the signal in itself good or bad? In my own practice, as I do this throughout sober life, throughout life with psychedelic use, what I find increasingly is an ability to relax into the truth of the moment and find that anything that arises really is just data that's trying to help me have a better representation of what's going on. And there are some data points that I find uncomfortable or that I wish weren't true, but in and of themselves, it's just information. And the source of any tension or of any joy or ecstasy comes from my relationship to that information occurring. And as I do that, I can increasingly direct my attention on how to change my relationship, because that's what I have the ability to influence and act upon, as opposed to trying somehow to just outsource responsibility for these events and say, well, they're bad, so I should feel bad. So one of the reasons that Buddhism for me is such a powerful methodology or philosophy for moving forward in life is that when we combine it with something like psychedelics, I think psychedelics are this incredible accelerant that leads to something that has been called before peak experiences. I'm sure we're all familiar with, hopefully, with peak experiences. There are those days where the sun is maybe shining bright and we're filled with vigor and a sense of purpose and clarity. And we feel like life has real meaning and that we're being authentically ourselves and contributing in ways that are really worth our time. And I know for myself that those days were far and few between. I didn't have a way of reliably accessing them before my first use of psychedelics. And then, like many wild youth before me, I went to a music festival and I had a friend that I loved and trusted encourage me to take psilocybin. And what followed was an afternoon, a whole day where it seemed like the saturation of the world was cranked up to 1,000. And it felt like layers of callus that had built up around my heart were able to fall off. And throughout the day, I experienced more self-discovery and aliveness in one afternoon than I think I had felt in many years prior. I was astonished afterwards by how interacting with the spirit of psilocybin, or with fungi, and how that had been such a reliable tool for accessing this, and how, wow, I didn't know that was even out there. But also, I very quickly appreciated the fact that I wasn't going to be eating mushrooms every day. That just wasn't going to fly for the way I wanted to live my life. Part of it was out of respect for the fact that the journey with the mushrooms was somewhat unpredictable. There was some really rocky parts where when I was surfing, it really felt like I could fall off. And if I fell off, I was going to get seriously hurt. And I'm reminded of the philosopher and neuroscientist Sam Harris, what he says in his amazing essay, How Drugs Can Change the World. He talks about how psychedelic use is amazing for helping people reach these peak experiences. But it's also kind of like strapping somebody to a rocket ship. You send them blasting off really at a rate they cannot control or directly influence if they're strapped on the outside of it, and there's some real risks. I think that psychedelics are probably a bit more like a jetpack, and that for a lot of us, with training and practice and familiarity, we can learn to use them. I don't know how many people can fly jetpacks reliably, but conceivably, I can imagine them being pretty adroit in them. And at the same time, jetpacks aren't for everybody. And so as powerful and as wonderful as psychedelics are, I have a really deep appreciation for the fact that they are to be used sparingly and with great intention and safety protocols. And that's where Buddhism comes in. Especially this set of teachings that combines bare attention, mindfulness, the idea of a third path, and the consideration that stimuli in and of themselves are neutral and not necessarily things we should reach for or try and avoid. I think that if you can internalize that and make the decision to practice and explore those teachings, it serves to be a reliable way of reaching the same heights that a jetpack gets you to. For myself, I love hiking. And if I was given the chance to use a jetpack to get to the top of a mountain, I would shamelessly do it in a heartbeat. And at the same time, I still know that I'm going to go outside and hike as much as I can. And I think that Buddhism really is something that can keep you safer as we use psychedelics, as well as being the hiking equivalent to a jetpack. You can, through practice and exercise, really walk in a way that is sustainable and nourishing to the top of the mountain and reach many of the same experiences that are otherwise accessible with exogenous substances. Just to close, I'll maybe share a short story of how this has manifested in my life. In 2019, I was minding my own business when I got a phone call that was from out of the country. And I was annoyed because I hadn't got a scam call in a while from long distance. So I didn't answer. And it called again. And at that point, I started to realize that, oh, maybe this wasn't a scam call. And so I picked up. And what followed was, I think, an experience that none of us would wish to have, in which a voice on the other end that I didn't recognize said my name and said, "Hey, I'm sorry to bother you, but I need to let you know I'm in the hospital with one of your family members. And the doctor's saying they don't know if they're going to make it through the night." Over the next 3 days, I booked a flight to the country they were in, and I got on the plane. And I knew that on that plane, there was going to be no Wi-Fi or any way to connect with the outside world. And I really had no idea about whether or not that family member was going to be alive when I got off the plane. And one of the things that struck me during that process was going up to my seat and finding that my aisle on the plane was empty except for me, which pre-COVID was a minor miracle. And I noticed that immediately I had a strong reaction. A stimuli seemed to emerge within my being that was one of joy and relief and gratitude. And as I started to practice mindfulness of that sensation, my bare attention picked up another sensation, which was of anger and resentment. And somehow I noticed part of me was angry that I was feeling joy and gratitude. There was a part of me that was basically screaming, saying, "Now is not the time. This is an emergency. How dare you feel grateful? How dare you feel joy? They might die." And I watched as there was these different parts of me that seemingly had mutually exclusive ideas of what was appropriate or true in that moment. And I just noticed, I did my best to follow that middle path and not to get swept away or fight or resist, and simply to observe. And what I noticed was that, wow, here I am, I think objectively under an incredible amount of stress. And I'm so quick to want to punish myself, to take away joy. I'm so quick or eager to constrict and to feel more pain than I have to. Isn't that interesting? And in doing so, I was allowed to, I think, open up some space and relax into the truth at that moment, which was that I was really feeling gratefulness. And for that flight, that really was something that helped keep me warm. I think as we move through the world, not only for avoiding suffering, but also for engaging in a way that is sustainable and conscious with our highest experiences, this methodology of Buddhism is invaluable and priceless. Thanks, everybody.
All right, thank you so much, Blake. We've got a question coming in right away here. Barbara saying she has a question but can't raise her hand. So let's go ahead and unmute.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Good.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Thank you, Blake. I thought that was really, really powerful. So thank you so much. You and I share a root teacher, so that's kind of interesting as well. I've studied with Gil and been down at the center and on retreat with him. So it's been really awesome. Just one of the things that I wanted to ask you about, I think, as many of us have, talked about some of the psychedelic experiences we've had, we've talked about the messages that we've gotten from the medicine and different things. And I'm just wondering, from that perspective, if you see an intersection between maybe some of the other aspects of Buddhism, like the ethics components of Buddhism, with what we learn in our trips. I think what I'm getting at is mindfulness is absolutely a critical piece of the path, but I'm wondering about things like right view, right thought, right speech, all of those things that are the things that we need to start to look at in order to ease suffering. So I'm wondering if you see an intersection between psychedelics and the rest of the Eightfold Path.
Yeah, for sure. I just want to say you're the first person I've met in BC who knows about Gil.
Yeah.
So it's wonderful to make that connection.
We can connect after.
Yeah, cool. One of the things that I really like to emphasize for a lot of people, especially those who come from a more Western tradition, or I don't know about you, but I grew up attending a Christian church, and many of my friends were steeped in different modes of colonial religions. And one of the things that really blew my mind was learning that Buddhism, at least the Buddhism that I've been exposed to, is not a series of 10 commandments. It's not a series of seemingly prescriptive statements of what should or shouldn't be. And that as a practice, as a methodology, it really is about self inquiry and like scientific method of exploring what's going on internally. And so when I think about things like the Eightfold Path and all the different wisdom teachings of the culture of Buddhism, all the different suggestions of how we can be right in the world and help others and respect ourselves, I think of those as really, really valuable writings and teachings from philosophers or from teachers or from loved ones. And I have so much faith and respect for the fact that people over thousands of years have managed to discover these, write these down, show them to their friends and be like, what do you think about this? And I really love the way they do it. But at the same time, I find I want to emphasize for people that those are not, again, religious precepts. And so I try and steer people towards what the basis of Buddhism for me really is, which is, again, the notion that desire is the source of all suffering. And if you want a means or a tool by which to explore that and change perhaps your relationship with it, it's bare attention and then mindfulness. And everything else that follows from that is just wonderful teachings that come from different people and you can engage with and learn from.
Thank you.
One thing I would say is that in this all, I think that not only psychedelics, but also with Buddhism, really cannot move forward in a good way and develop like sound concepts or frameworks of ethical behavior or right relationship with the world without acknowledging and honoring the connection we have to the earth. And so that's not a part of this talk, but I would hope that anyone who uses these methodologies increasingly listens to those who are mentors and hoping to come up with good ways of being, as well as like really investigating their connection to this planet and the natural cycles.
Yeah, super important. Thank you so much.
All right, next up we have Sid. I think you're ready to go and unmuted.
Yep. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, sound great. Go ahead.
Awesome. Blake, thank you so much. It was a really wonderful talk and a touching story, so thank you. And I'm also a Dalhousie alma mater, so we share that. I want to ask you, Blake, about kind of the experiences that people describe further along the Buddhist meditative path, and how that might be analogous to some so-called peak experiences in the psychedelic state. It's really interesting when you consider the neuroscience literature on psychedelics and a lot of work on the default mode network in both the psychedelic state and the meditative state. And there's kind of a lot of talk of some convergence. And so how much do they converge, would you say, experiences and insights on the cushion versus a high dose of psilocybin? How much can we draw comparisons between those experiences and those insights? And how close are the Venn diagram?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is something that fascinates me. I've been really enjoying recently brushing up on my neuroscience. I don't know what you took at Dal, but I took technically psychology, but at Dal, all the psychology courses are cross-listed with neuroscience. So that's basically what I ended up studying. And I've been brushing up with my understanding of how the brain works by listening to the Andrew Huberman Lab podcast. Highly recommend it for anyone who has an appetite for technical understanding of brain mechanisms. And something I just heard yesterday that really like had a cascading click of like aha moments for me was the like neurological mechanisms by which our directed attention and then intentional like attention to changes, how that influences and promotes plasticity in our brain. And so if you're a kid, this doesn't apply, but for adults, in order for your brain to exhibit plasticity and to change, you need to be focused and aware of what you're trying to change, and then have excitement and like real like energy for it. And I think about how with the jetpack analogy, and when you're consuming these powerful exogenous substances that really promote activity and like, whoa, like what's going on here? They're really helping super boost that process of neuroplasticity and really helping us like examine which patterns we cling to that maybe don't serve. Whereas with meditation, I think it's like essentially the exact same process, except it's much more deliberate and small. Instead of flooding your brain with acetylcholine and dopamine and like having it all be super hyper malleable for a brief period of time in which you can really be like, oh wow, what is going on, and change it all rapidly. I think meditation moves forward in a way that's incremental and a lot more stable and hopefully a lot more directable, but the underlying mechanisms I would posit are like identical.
Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Next up, we have Andrew. You are up, and there's no one. Sorry, Andrew D is up. No one's after that. So if anyone has any questions, again, reminder: pop a note in the chat or raise your hand. Thanks. Go ahead, Andrew.
Thanks, Kenny. Thank you, Blake, for sharing that beautiful story, a vulnerable story about flying home. Thank you also for sharing about your Theravada Buddhist background. I practice in the Theravada as well. I took the psilocybin, I think about a year ago. And one of the things that I'm hoping you could expand a little on is the fifth precept and how it relates to responsible use of psilocybin and other medicines. You made the comparison with flying a jetpack. And I mean, fifth precept, for those who are not Buddhist, basically says that you should abstain from things that cause heedlessness, because that's not conducive to developing insight and mindfulness. And there's a lot of discussion in Buddhist circles about whether or not psychedelics should be used. Obviously, the discussions we're having here are about using the medicine to increase insight, increase mindfulness. At least that's how I try to use it. But at the same time, I'm also rooted in, as you put it beautifully, a colonial religion. I was raised Orthodox Presbyterian, where Buddhism talks about training precepts. Orthodox Protestantism talks about commandments. So there is this tension in my head. How do I balance these things out? I understand the truth can be fluid and you need to find a balance. And I found that using psilocybin can increase mindfulness, but I'm sort of hesitant. I find myself hesitant to taking maybe larger doses because I can see how they could create more insight, but I could also crash into a wall rather than lift off and get the wider view. And I was wondering if you could perhaps expand a little bit on training practices you use to stay more grounded. Do you use more concentration practices in your meditation and rather than insight before you go on a trip? Like I heavily practice noting practice and insight meditation, but maybe the way to stay more grounded in a psychedelic experience might be to do more concentration practices, etc. I'm not even talking just morally, but how to practically use this while staying truthful to the Buddhist tradition and the Buddhist goal of reducing clinging.
Yeah, what a wonderful question. Thanks. If anyone's interested, Christoph mentioned, I do have a podcast. It's called Rupert Radio, just my last name. And actually, in preparation for this talk, my dear friend Andras, that some of you may know, he was kind enough to help me brainstorm and kind of tease apart what I was going to say here. And he ended up asking me, I think, a very similar version of your question here. And it was basically, how do we reconcile, and this is kind of what I'm hearing from you, the general wisdom and teachings of the Buddhist tradition that suggest we be wary of or eliminate or reduce our participation with substances that may directly affect our consciousness. And yeah, I think I heard part of your, I'll just go back to the podcast. So we talked about this as well, and there might be some difference if you want to check it out more. I heard part of your answer already in this, in which I think for a lot of people who come into wanting to discuss Buddhism or like relate to it, there's this idea of like speaking to an authority and getting answers, and you got to do those answers just so, or else it doesn't work and you're going to be burned for eternity. Whereas Buddhism really is a commitment to open source, self-reflection, investigation, experimentation. To be totally frank, there was a time in my life where I poo-pooed meditation, Buddhism. I thought it was super woo-woo, esoteric, pseudoscience stuff. And I think that's a reflection of my inability and willingness to like really even consider it for a moment and pause and reflect on what's being suggested here. And so with any teaching of Buddhism, with any sort of notion of what is true or what might be or what we can do to live more skillfully, I really like to consider it as suggestions. They've perhaps carried down through a lineage and they've been tested, which, depending on your point of view, might give them more credence. But at the end of the day, they're not hard and fast rules or instructions that are things you can do right or wrong. They're like signposts that people have put along a beautiful journey. And they're saying like, hey, like a lot of people have found that if you reduce your consuming of exogenous substance, things like psilocybin or alcohol or caffeine, it might create a more stable background or space in which to assess and investigate the situations that arise. And I think that's totally true. I think we want to be wary of modulating our physiology so haphazardly that at any time, like we're more excitable or less excitable or all these different things. And at the same time, I personally believe that the teachings of Buddhism don't suggest that we shouldn't ever do these things or that it's in some way immoral or wrong. I think actually there's a lot of reason to believe that intentional, compassionate curiosity with the experience, as long as it doesn't hurt others, that can be a really skillful thing and a really worthwhile experiment to run. And so again, I would just say that to close this is that we should be wary of any sort of prescription for or recommendation for psychedelic use that suggests that repeated or continued use of it is going to produce a meaningful life or a life of whatever good things you want. I would really suggest that psychedelics have their most potentiality and their most value when we use them to become aware of what is possible, so that when we return to our sober and our waking life, we can work with diligence and real like purpose towards like, wow, I know it's possible. I really want to get there under my own power and not with the assist of this external force.
Thank you so much for that. And it really resonates with me. It reminds me of the first time I took MDMA when I was, and it basically showed me the view from the mountain. And I had the exact same realization. Like now I know that I can experience that state, and now I want to work to get there. And like I put it in almost the exact same words at the time. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, just two quick things.
Oh, go ahead.
One would be that, or I'll just start with, you had a specific question about what protocols to get there. Specifically, I use attention on my breath, and this is so deceptively simple, but the trick, I think, to this whole thing is really just desire is the source of all suffering, bare attention, followed by mindfulness, and having an openness and a curiosity and a compassion to whatever is true in that moment, while avoiding the common pitfalls of the two extremes of the path and reminding ourselves continuously that there is no such thing as a good sensation. Like, it's just as important to like practice these things with sensations that are exciting as it is with those that we are terrified of. And so in psychedelic, whether it's for myself or I'm helping someone else, I really advise them to be with their breath, and as well as to say that things are probably going to surf up and they're going to surf down, and it's all par for the course. It's all okay.
Thank you. And do you also use, I don't want to hijack the floor here, and there's 3 more questions, but do you also use samatha meditation alongside vipassana meditation to prepare for use of psilocybin?
I'm actually not familiar with that term, but perhaps it'd be better if we talked afterwards.
That sounds good. Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you.
Oh, all right, so we have Ian up next, and just so people know kind of the order, Misha, you are going to be after, and Emily after that. So just be ready for that so you can be on there. Ian, go right ahead.
Hi, Blake. I think you may have just kind of answered my question. Over the last year and a half, I've developed this practice with moderate doses of mushrooms where I over and over again pay attention to whatever sensations are coming up in my body. And then I breathe into that space, and I don't know how else to describe it. If I feel something in my shoulder, then I will put my intention on that area and follow it, and then breathe into it. Now, when I describe this practice at meetings, integration circles, and that kind of thing, nobody's really responded to that, even people who are much more experienced than me. So I kind of wonder, am I doing something wrong? But the way you've talked about it sounds very similar to what I'm doing. So I'm just curious, as a Buddhist practitioner, are there other ways of me modifying that practice, or am I on the right track or something like that? I guess that's my question.
Yeah, well, congratulations for stumbling upon that. It sounds like a really peaceful and at least non-threatening mode of exploration. So that seems really neat. That directly parallels what I practice myself and what I try and advocate for. I've heard some people refer to it as somatic experiencing, which is soma, the body, just experiencing different sensations in our body. And I think there's so much debate about what proper meditation is, and there's so many different ways of doing it. But my understanding is that the most basic form is what you just described, is being aware of sensations, bare attention, noticing that they are occurring, and then directing our focus to them. And in doing so, we may find that by also maintaining a consistent awareness of our breath, that those sensations really relax. Sometimes they intensify just as we draw our attention to them, but almost always those sensations, once it's like if you're in the spaceship and you're looking at all the different buttons, once I notice the thing is going, I might be tempted to be like, yeah, okay, got it, and just continue to ignore it outside of my peripherals. But I think there's this system built in where if you don't fully allow yourself to be with it and to take a moment to appreciate what it's trying to tell you, it knows that and it's going to continue to persist. Whereas if you can direct your attention, okay, that's what it's saying, and sit with it until you fully understand it, I think that is an incredibly powerful tool. And when it comes to additional ways you can refine or tinker with that, there's many. There's a ton of different more structured or elaborate modes of meditation. And for myself, I would just suggest that increasingly, I just really enjoy deepening this practice. And the more I pay attention, the more I notice that it's really hard, and that there's ever deeper levels of awareness and conscious participation to uncover. So yeah, I would just continue to say you're doing a great job, and yeah, see if you can keep going at it.
Excellent. Thank you, Ian. Misha, you are up next. You want to unmute yourself? And
Yes,
Emily,
thank
you're
you.
after her.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Blake, for very much for your talk. I'm actually have some of the same questions that Andrew D has. I was thinking about the, well, first, just when I was young, I did experimental, more experimenting with mind altering substances, but now I'm what I would call psychedelic curious, in part for working with trauma recovery and further personal and spiritual development. So one of the models that I work with when especially if I'm talking about an exogenous substance, is Joseph Campbell's model of preparation, initiation, integration. So the preparation phase is what I'd be doing before I take the substance. The initiation would be during the taking the medicine, the safe container I'm in, et cetera, and then the integration is after. So I was curious from your perspective with the Buddhist technologies, how you would apply them to those different phases of the process. I'm imagining from your response to Andrew that might be too big of a scope to answer during the Q&A. And then the other question I just had is, I live in the United States. So I've just been wondering and watching to see what happens with the legality of access to substances and ways to be able to access them where there's people and places to go access the use of them in a safe environment, a safe container that's being provided, because I don't feel confident to be able to provide my own safe container, just as when I'm going through certain internal processes that are in the process of evolving, I need at least another human to help hold space.
Yeah. I'll try and deal with those two questions. The first, I love the idea of really being aware and alive to the fact that there is a pre and a during and a post. And I think that so many people have really teased out that is critical to do specific things during those different periods. Were you asking for specifically, so how Buddhism might apply to each of those?
I would love that answer, yes. And if it's too big for now, I understand.
Yeah, I mean, so in the most simple terms, I can just share what when I help people through journeys, how I structure it. So the first is really one of, this isn't super groundbreaking stuff, but it's just really one of education and really helping the person know so many of the things that are going to be critical about the journey. So that might be how long they might expect the experience. What are some of the common side effects? What are some of the most common sort of experiences or takeaways people can have, including challenges or epiphanies or the whole gamut. And I think at the beginning, it's probably the most important time because you have to do so much front loading to help prepare people so that they can really go into it, not trying to figure stuff out that's like periphery stuff, but they can really be alive with the experience and confident that the ground they stand on is stable. So yeah, I would really encourage people to do so much research and get educated on everything to expect, as well as to really investigate what your intentions or motivations for doing this kind of journey are, and to really sit with that and experience it. And if it's not feeling like it's the right time, to heed that warning and yeah, just be really clear on the why, because that, in my experience, I know there's been some people in this meetup group who gave presentations in the past who might disagree, but I think that being mindful of your intentions or your motivations is a really useful way of having a tuning fork to return to during what could be a exultant or tumultuous time. And part of going into the bulk of the experience, and perhaps this is what I'll finish with, I think just returning to the breath and then being aware that there is no such thing as a good sensation or a bad sensation. There aren't things that objectively we should try and get more of or things that we should run away from, and simply consistently, persistently, with compassion, curiosity, and undeniable warmth, just be alive to what is happening. and to trust that whatever it is has a message, and to allow our focus to exist on it. And sometimes that sensation will be so intense that it's threatening, at which time it's okay. We don't have to stay with it. No, there's no metaphysical gun to our head. It's sometimes I think of like mindfulness and bare attention as like doing weights or something. And sometimes the weight's shaking and you're going to drop it on yourself. If you're doing like a bench press, you don't have to finish that completion. You can get someone's help and take it off for a second, at which point you can return to your breath, maybe your intention. Maybe you have a talisman or a little touchstone that reminds you of loved ones or something that you care deeply about and feel safe and nourished by. But I think as much as possible as you can feel safe and empowered to direct your awareness to what is true in that moment, there will be tons of value and discovery and insights that are opened up. The second thing, just about how to get access to practitioners. Yeah, I mean, there's amazing things going on in Oregon and in California. I don't know where you're based out of, but they are definitely opening initiatives, as well as in Colorado. And I could go on, but increasingly, I think the legality is opening up. But I also know that there is a very healthy and robust network of underground therapists, and people you're really taking it into your own hands there. So there's a level of risk, but I would encourage you to use resources like, I believe maps.com has a reference of different practitioners who are mainly therapists or psychologists who will help you with, it's usually called trip integration. Just a note here on the legality of it. My understanding is that in most places, it's not illegal for you to be on a substance with a therapist. It's just illegal for the therapist to give you a substance. So if you were to say do a substance outside of their office and then go in, and there may or may not be some like licensed professionals who will talk with you about that beforehand and have some experience of helping facilitate those kinds of experiences. And yeah, one place to check out is the MAPS professionals, and then to cross-reference that with referrals and do your due diligence. It's really important to ask people and get a sense of who they are, because there's, unfortunately, in an unregulated market, abuse.
It looks like just from a quick Google search, I saw 3 meetups in Arizona on meetup.com. So good luck. All right, I think we're going to round this one out with Emily. So your mic is unmuted. We'll transition into the group discussions. Thank you, Emily. Go right ahead.
I'm sorry, my camera is not working, so I apologize for not jumping on. But tons of smiles over here. Thank you so much for everything you've shared today. It's been super insightful. I'm just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on what your meditation practice is like. Are you one of those really cool people who wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and spend their witching hour getting connected with themselves? Is it a daily thing? I find that it's usually when I feel like I can't breathe and all of a sudden, oh, I haven't meditated today, kind of like my lifesaver. I just wanted to say too, I really appreciate how much you focus on the fact that there is no wrong way to meditate. I try to bring that into yoga teachings. There's no wrong way to breathe. It's just kind of what your body needs at that moment. Yeah.
Well, thanks for your appreciation. My meditation process at this point, for a number of years, I had a daily meditation practice. And what that looked like was usually somewhere around half an hour in the morning and then half an hour at night. Sometimes that was an hour, sometimes it was 40 minutes, sometimes it was 10 minutes. But I usually aimed to get as close as I could to an hour each day. Now, and for the last, I'd say about a year and a bit, I haven't been meditating in a structured, regular, or like at this time each day. What I find my practice is really transitioned to, and I don't know if this is just an excuse, but is one of what I've referred to as referred to as waking meditation, such that I try to infuse, as much as I can be aware of it, all things that I do with a level of, honestly, meditation. I've had some experiences of just really mundane tasks, whether that's brushing my teeth or making dinner, where I am trying to meditate in the process, which means focusing on the task that I'm doing while continuing to breathe and feel my breath, and being deliberate and intentional with my focus and awareness. I've also found myself in some pretty obscure or exciting situations in which I've taken the opportunity to meditate as well. I had the really good fortune of being a photographer at a large music festival, and there was a point where there was so much ruckus and a carnival sort of atmosphere going on, and I remember finding a space on the side of the stage in front of this whole production crew, and just taking the time to really drop in and connect with my being and my breath, regardless of what the externalities of the world were foisting onto me. So I think we can, for myself, I can meditate as I'm walking or as I'm writing or as I'm doing tasks, as well as I will not hesitate in social or external situations to really carve out the time and drop in if I have the sense that it's going to be really beneficial or if I'm out of alignment.
Thank you. That's beautiful. I appreciate meditating in the chaos of the world and not trying to silence everything too. It's very cool.
Yeah, I mean, if you are, and it's so minimal, is simply sitting cross-legged or sitting on a chair and like breathing, why restrict? The question itself is in different scenarios. Like if I feel like I'm in touch with what is true for me in that moment, act to try and work that into my life whenever possible.
All right. So that's all the questions we have. Christoph, is there anything you wanted to say in closing before I wrap things up here?
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Thanks so much. I just want to just give a thanks to Blake for coming on and giving this and just sharing all those insights and really getting in there and answering those questions. I really appreciate you coming here and doing that. I also want to give a thanks to Ken for doing the moderating. I know it's a bit of a challenging position to be reading the chats and trying to get through all the questions and everything for everyone. So I want to thank you guys. And I think we posted the handle for that in the chat as well. So if you guys want to check that out, that's for Blake's social media handle there. With that, I think we're gonna go and we'll do our 3 minutes break. And then for those of you who do not want to stay, we would ask that you disconnect and leave, because otherwise it's going to alter our arrangement with the groups. But again, I do recommend you guys stick around. It's a smaller groups. It's a chance to really meet everyone and to sort of connect on a more personal level. And it's a lot of fun. So really encourage you guys to stick around for that.